Good morning. My name is Andrea with Happy Cloud Creations, and I am jumping on today because it is week 4 of the Infinite Night Helix Quilt Along. So I'm live over on Instagram and Facebook today. If this is live, there will be a little live thing up in the corner. If it is a replay, that live button will be gone. I will also upload this to my YouTube channel when I'm all done. So this week we will be making one block A, which is basically your center, upside down, center block of the quilt. And then you'll be making 2 block Bs, which it repeats here and here, these 2 blocks. To create this swirl, the helix design, it required a lot of blocks in this quilt. So I think that it goes to, I don't know, like M or N, something like that. So there's a lot of blocks. So that's why a lot of these blocks might be wider and thicker, or wider than it is tall. If you jump on, say hi, and so I can make sure I can see comments. I think there's a couple people on. I know sometimes it's hard to find these videos, at least in the Facebook group. It takes a while for it to pop up at the top of the screen. So we'll be making 3 blocks today. Next week we'll be making a lot more blocks, but they're very simple blocks, so I think it'll still be manageable for a 1-week time period. So we're going to start on, hello Viola, I'm glad you found it this time, yay! Okay, so on page 6, that's where we're going to start for block A. And I guess the biggest tip I have for these blocks is to read and look at the diagrams closely. So if you notice in step 1, there's going to be 4 different units you're going to be sewing together in this step. Since all the directions were the same, I just kept it in one step instead of making each 4 of those a different step. It just makes it easier and it takes up less pages. This pattern is fairly large, so I didn't want it to be any extra pages. So find the pieces that correspond with what size you are making. I'm making the king, so I look under the queen king size and just grab all these pieces, and it'll tell you make 2 of each unit. So you want to make 2 of unit 1, 2 of unit 2, 2 of unit 3, and 2 of unit 4. It's basically right sides together, sewing the units together as shown. Also, if you have any questions during this video, let me know, and I will try to answer. So once we get to step 2, we're taking all those units we made in step 1, and we're going to be sewing them together. And also, take note of the placement in the diagrams, because they're going to be slightly different, the top one and the bottom one. So A is going to be slightly different than B, and C is slightly different than D. So you're going to want to see the placement. That'll create the correct shape. So I already sewed these units together, just so I could show you. So let's see. I have my, it might be backwards on your screen, I can't tell. My A and my B. So if you see, they're slightly different. So it's not like you could make the same one and then flip it, because then it would be wrong. You want it to be like this. And since there's really no seams to nest, I typically will just line both strips up, flatten them out, and pin them in place and sew them together. So once you have those units done, just press them. With mine, I pressed everything to the black just because I didn't want the black showing through. So if you see, I pressed mine to the black. If your pieces are going to be lighter in here or lighter background fabric than your main color, you may want to press it to the outside, depending on if you can see the shadow where you pressed it. But then I just pressed it down. So a lot of my steps will have arrows, and these are the pressing instructions I recommend. But if you prefer to press your seams open for less bulk, you can do that too. I typically don't press open for bulk. I try not to quilt on my seams, and so I just usually press to one side or the other. Okay, so once we have these little guys done, we set them aside, and then you're going to go to step 3. And so this step is it's a very similar unit to our diamond and square block, but you're just making points at the top. You're just giving the top of the square wings. So it's another stitch and flip block. If you are using directional prints, you may want to look at this last diagram here on page 7 on the bottom and see how each one of those units faces a different way. So you may want to lay out your fabric, you know, your top one, your bottom one, your side one, and then determine where you need your points to go. On this side of the unit, on the top of the unit, if you're wanting your directions to go all the same way. This pattern may not be good for directional prints just because you make a piece and then you rotate it here, you rotate it there. So it's directional prints, I don't care for them, but then it's like sometimes it's like I love that print and I have to buy it and it's directional, so I just like work with it. So I did use directional print for this one. So you're gonna draw your line on your piece. I know it's hard to see because it's white thread, and I use my hair marker when I draw my lines with I just use the smallest square ruler I have, which is a 6.5 by 6.5. I draw my lines, and then I sew right up to the outside of the line. If you sew too far in this way, it can make your point not come out fully. So you're going to want to sew right up next to that line, chomping into that line, like the other stitch and flips we did last week. And then when I go to the iron, I make sure all my corners meet up. I finger press it open, and then I press it with my iron. And then, let's see. I just take my scissors, and I like to trim out the back pieces. If your back pieces aren't all lining up, you may want to leave this piece in there just so that you can maintain that square shape. So then once this is pressed, you don't want to iron with a lot of motion, just press it. You're going to add your second square on, with your line, your diagonal line going this way, and you're going to sew up toward this corner. And then finger press, match up all the corners like that, so all the corners match up, and press it. If your fabric is reaching out, you're gonna know, okay, I'm gonna need to trim that after that unit's done. But if your fabric, say, is in too far like that, you're gonna want to leave this back piece after you're done pressing, just so that you can see, okay, this is where my lines should end. But if you're sewing right up against that line, it should end up being the same size, the correct size that you want it to be. So then we finger press that open. And then I got some that are already pressed and done. I'll show you what that would look like if we just cut that out. Say, can't remember who I learned that tip from. I think it was a different quilt designer that did a pattern on the National Quilters Circle quilt along. So see this one? This one doesn't go all the way to the edge, so you can see. That's where I need my edge to be. So when you're sewing this unit to another unit, you're going to want to line up with the blue edge, not the pink edge. It will make your block a little bulkier, but it'll ensure that your ending block will be the correct size. And that's the important thing. These are just all tester ones. Good morning. Again, I don't know why, 2 weeks in a row it cut me off. So I finished the whole video and realized it cut me off at 11 minutes. So I'm going to try to redo this for you guys so that you can get the information. Let me know if you have any questions during this. I got to figure out why it's cutting me off. That's so weird. All right, so we're still on block A. We finished our little house units. And we finished our beginning unit. So we're going to take all those units that we made and we're going to lay them out specifically how they are down in this diagram with a color C square and 4 color D rectangles. So we can finish up our units. When I'm sewing those rows together, I like to first sew these rectangles on to the top and bottom row, and then I will go and sew these units to those sides. So I'll just pick these up, sew those, and bring them back to my pieces that are all laid out. And then I will pin these to the sides, and then I will go back to my machine and sew again. Same with this center unit. I'll first sew these triangle or little house units to my square, and then I pin these, and I'm going to go back and sew these large arrow units to the side, just making sure this arrow unit is on top, and you're going to want your needle to line up with the top of that point. You don't want it to go below the point because then you're going to cut off your point when you open that up, but if your needle is hitting right above that point, you'll be good. Does anyone have questions with block A? I know it kicked me off, so I don't think anyone else has joined back, but if you have questions, you can always email me at happycloudcreation@gmail.com, or you can ask me a question in the Facebook Quilt Along group. I'll also be able to answer from there. So I guess I will go on to block B, which is on page 8. So first we're going to take that diamond in square units we made last week. We're going to make a border around it. I've got to find my pieces. They're all out of order now. Alright, so first I put my pieces on the side, making sure to have this side up when sewing so that we don't cut our point off. We want that to go, see how my needle, my thread is right above that point, so that when I go and set my seam and then I finger press it open, you're not going to lose your point. And that's also why after I'm done making these diamond in square units, I measure them to make sure they're correct length, because you want them to line up with these pieces correctly. Then if you're doing a correct 1/4 inch scant seam, these side pieces will line up correctly, and you'll be able to sew those together, which I have my finished one right here. So again, you're gonna, for this one, you're gonna have your stitch line up at the top so that your points don't get lost. And then we have this little unit. You're gonna wanna make 2 of these since all sizes are gonna have 2 block Bs. Then next, we're going to, step 2, make these little strips, which is basically right size of fabric together. For these, you want to make sure your seam is consistent all the way through. You don't want it to be short, less on one side than the other. And then also setting your seam with the iron and then finger pressing open and pressing does help these lines be more straighter. Then we have these little units done. Then we'll go to step 3 and we'll make this little side units to the block B's. There's nothing to really nest in these, so I just kind of lay them flat together, pin them in place, and sew together. And then I set my seam, finger press it open, and then press toward the arrow unit. And then I only made 2 blocks, so I just have the pieces for 2 blocks. So I will sew all 3 of these together. When I go do that, you're going to want to take these seams on your center square and your arrow seams. You notice these were pressed outward, these are pressed inward. They will nest up nicely when you go to sew these together. And when you're sewing them together, I recommend having the arrow unit on top so that you can make sure your seam doesn't cut this little triangle off on the top. So that's block A. Block B, all sizes will use those next week. There'll be there'll be more blocks, different blocks, but it's just one of each block. And baby size will not be making all of those blocks. So make sure to look at your pattern. Once you get to block after block C and D, it says baby skip to O and P. So you're not going to make any more after that. You can go make your O and P tomorrow if you want, or next week. Or you can, you know, make it drag out because we still have a few more weeks for all the larger sizes. And oh, I posted in the group, there is a little typo on page 9, step 2. It just says right here, block B and C should measure, which it should say block C and D should measure. So I post, whenever there's a correction, I post that in on my website, and it's in the menu under pattern corrections or updates. And so if you ever have any of my patterns, you're like, I wonder if there's any updates to this, just go there and it'll tell you. If you ever see a typo in one of my patterns, you know, I'm human, my testers are human, so they're not going to be completely perfect all the time. We try hard as we can. Like I had, I think 12 testers for this one, and I also had a tech editor that went through it like for 7 hours. She looked at it. So sometimes there's little typos. So you can always let me know. It doesn't hurt my feelings. I appreciate it. So next week, let's see. I think I will probably do the video on Wednesday as well, and I'll see if maybe I can plug my laptop into the internet. Maybe that'll help with the cutting off of the video. So happy quilting, and I will see you guys next week. Have a great day.